This story contains themes of psychological distress, confinement, and existential dread that some listeners may find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. Imagine waking up, not gently, not in your own bed, but with a shock that rips through your entire being, leaving you gasping for air in absolute darkness. Your head pounds with a dull, insistent throb, a drumbeat against the inside of your skull, and the air around you is thick, cold, tasting faintly of metal and something sterile, like a forgotten hospital corridor. That's how it started for Michael. One moment, oblivion. The next, a terrifying, suffocating awareness. He blinked or tried to. His eyelids felt heavy, glued shut, but a faint, sickly green glow eventually pierced through the blackness. It wasn't natural light. It was the kind of light that seemed to leach the color out of everything, leaving the world in shades of sickly gray and muted olive. As his eyes struggled to focus, the shape of a room began to emerge from the gloom. Not a room he recognized. Not a room anyone would recognize as normal. The walls were made of some kind of seamless, matte gray metal, cold and unyielding to the touch. The floor felt like the same material, polished to a dull sheen. There were no windows, no paintings, no personal effects. Just four stark walls, a ceiling that seemed impossibly low, and a single heavy-looking door set flush into one of the panels. A door with no handle on his side. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw its way up Michael's throat. He tried to sit up, but his muscles screamed in protest. Every joint ached, every bone felt heavy, as if he'd been asleep for a century. His clothes, a simple t-shirt and jeans, felt stiff, unfamiliar, even though he knew, with a certainty that defied his memory gaps, that they were his. He pushed himself up against the cold metal wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Where was he? What had happened? The last thing he could recall was fragmented, hazy. A party? Laughing with friends? The distant thrum of music? A sudden sharp pain at the back of his neck. Then, nothing. Just this sterile metallic box. Hello. His voice, when it came, was a raw croak, startlingly loud in the oppressive silence. It echoed back, flat and dead, swallowed by the metal. No response. Not a whisper, not a distant hum. Nothing but the frantic beat of his own heart against his ribs. He pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly, his legs feeling like jelly. He stumbled towards the door, his hand reaching out, fingers scraping against the smooth, cold surface. It was thick, solid, without seam or hinge. Just a perfectly flat panel, broken only by a small recessed square near the top, where a tiny red light pulsed with a slow, rhythmic beat. It looked less like a door and more like a sealed vault. He pressed his ear against it, straining to hear anything from the other side. A muffled conversation? The clang of machinery? The distant footsteps of a guard? Nothing. Only the faint, almost imperceptible hum of unseen systems, a deep vibration that seemed to emanate from the very core of the earth beneath his feet. It was a sound that didn't just fill the air. It filled his bones, a low, unnerving resonance that spoke of immense power and immense depth. He slammed his fist against the door, a desperate, futile gesture. Hey, is anyone out there? Let me out. Again, silence. The red light continued its slow, indifferent pulse, mocking his desperation. Michael backed away from the door, his eyes darting around the confined space. He ran his hands over the walls, searching for any crack, any seam, any hint of how he might have gotten in, or how he might get out. Nothing. The construction was flawlessly engineered, designed for absolute containment. His gaze fell upon a small metallic grate set into the ceiling, directly above where he had woken. It was a ventilation shaft, but instead of the usual dusty, open slats, this one was covered by a fine, almost invisible mesh, too small for even a finger to pass through. And from it, a faint, almost imperceptible breeze carried that same metallic, sterile scent. He felt a primal terror begin to bloom in his chest. This wasn't a prison in the conventional sense. This was something else. A specialized facility, and the lack of personal interaction, the silence, the sheer impossible perfection of the confinement, screamed of a deliberate, calculated purpose. He tried to force his mind to push past the fog, to remember. What could possibly lead him here? He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't a spy. He was just Michael, an architect from Omaha, Nebraska. He had a dog, a mortgage, a slightly overdue library book. He had a perfectly mundane, normal life. Or at least he had a perfectly mundane, normal life. A chilling thought crept into his mind, cold as the metal walls. What if he wasn't meant to be found? What if no one knew he was gone? The party, he remembered leaving alone. A quick call to his friend Jessica, saying he was heading home. That was it. No one would have been expecting him. He looked down at himself. His clothes were slightly rumpled but otherwise clean. No blood, no obvious injuries beyond the dull ache in his head. He felt his pockets. Empty. Wallet, phone, keys all gone. He was stripped of identity, stripped of connection to the outside world. His eyes scanned the room again, desperately searching for any clue, any sign that could explain this nightmare. And then he saw it. Barely visible, etched into the metal wall near the floor, was a series of tiny, almost imperceptible symbols. They weren't letters or numbers or anything he recognized. They were abstract geometric shapes arranged in a precise repeating pattern. It was so faint he almost missed it, but once he saw it he couldn't unsee it. It was like a signature, a brand on the very fabric of his prison. And then a sound. Not from the door but from the wall opposite where no door existed. A low internal click followed by a faint whirring. A small section of the wall, no bigger than his palm, slid silently inwards, revealing a small recessed compartment. Inside, resting on a sterile white pad, was a single clear plastic cup filled with water and a small foil-wrapped bar. His stomach rumbled. He hadn't realized how thirsty he was, how hungry. But a wave of suspicion washed over him, momentarily overriding the hunger. This wasn't an act of kindness. This was maintenance, like feeding an animal in a cage. He stared at the cup of water, then at the foil bar. It looked like some kind of nutrient paste, bland and unappetizing. Was it safe? Was it drugged? Could he trust anything in this place? But the thirst was overwhelming, a dry rasp in his throat. His body was screaming for hydration. With trembling hands, he reached into the compartment. The air inside felt slightly cooler, almost refrigerated. He grabbed the cup, his fingers brushing against the cold, smooth plastic. No strange sensations. He pulled it out, and as he did, the compartment whirred again, and the section of the wall slid silently back into place, leaving no trace. It was as if it had never been there. He drank the water slowly, savoring each drop. It was pure, cold, tasteless. He felt a small measure of strength return to his limbs. Then he unwrapped the foil bar. It was a pale grayish color with no discernible smell. He took a tiny bite. It was bland, slightly sweet, and surprisingly filling. He ate the whole thing, his body gratefully soaking up the meager nutrients. But even as his physical needs were met, his mind raced, spiraling into deeper fear. They were feeding him. They were keeping him alive. For what purpose? What kind of facility was this, hidden deep underground where people were held without explanation, without contact, without hope of escape? The thought of being trapped, utterly isolated, beneath layers of earth and concrete, with unseen eyes watching his every move, was a terror far greater than any physical pain. He was a specimen, a subject, in a cage designed with chilling precision. And the silence, the absolute crushing silence, was the loudest, most terrifying sound of all. The silence pressed down on Michael, a physical weight that threatened to crack his skull. He tried to scream, to unleash the primal terror clawing at his throat, but no sound escaped. His vocal cords felt paralyzed, his mouth dry and unresponsive. It was as if the air itself had been sucked out, leaving him in a vacuum of his own despair. He was acutely aware of the cold, sterile floor beneath him, the smooth, unyielding surface of the walls around him. This wasn't a prison cell in any conventional sense. There were no bars, no rough concrete, no flickering fluorescent light. Instead, it was a perfectly engineered cube, illuminated by a soft, diffused glow emanating from the ceiling, making every surface gleam with an unsettling cleanliness. He gingerly pushed himself up, his muscles protesting with a dull ache he couldn't quite place. His head throbbed, a persistent drumbeat behind his eyes. He reached up, his fingers exploring the lump on the back of his scalp. It was tender, still slightly swollen, a testament to whatever blunt force had rendered him unconscious. The last thing he remembered was leaving work, the chill bite of the evening air against his face as he walked towards his car. Then a sudden dizziness, a blinding flash, and nothing. Consciousness had returned in disjointed, terrifying flashes, muted voices, the distinct scent of antiseptic, and the cold brush of something metallic against his skin. Now this silent, inescapable box. He stumbled to the nearest wall, his fingers trailing along its surface. It felt like polished steel, seamless and impossibly smooth. No cracks, no seams, no discernible joints. He pressed his ear against it, straining to catch any sound, any echo from beyond. Nothing. Just the faint, rhythmic thumping of his own terrified heart. He spun slowly, taking in the full scope of his confinement. The cube was perhaps 10 feet by 10 feet, utterly devoid of furniture or even a toilet. Just him and the oppressive, watchful emptiness. His eyes darted upwards, searching for the source of the diffused light. It seemed to come from a panel set into the ceiling, a milky white rectangle that pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible hum. He squinted, trying to discern if it was a window, or perhaps a camera lens, but it was too opaque, too indistinct. Yet he still felt those unseen eyes. A prickle of dread crawled up his spine, a visceral certainty that he was being observed, analyzed, every twitch and tremor of his fear meticulously recorded. A sudden sharp click echoed from one of the walls. Michael flinched, his heart leaping into his throat. A small square panel, previously invisible, slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a narrow slot. A tray barely large enough for a single item slid out. On it sat a small clear plastic cup filled with water and a plain white nutrient bar-like object. It was unappetizing, devoid of any branding or distinguishing features. His stomach growled, a hollow, painful protest against the hours of forced starvation. He hesitated, suspicion warring with instinct. Was it safe? Was it drugged? But the thirst was a burning inferno, and the hunger a dull, persistent ache. He snatched the cup, gulping down the water greedily, the cool liquid a momentary balm against the dryness of his throat. He then picked up the bar, examining it. It smelled faintly of oats and something vaguely metallic. With a deep breath, he took a small bite. It tasted bland, somewhat chalky, but undeniably filling. As he finished, his eyes still fixed on the open slot, the tray retracted with another soft hiss, and the panel sealed shut, becoming seamless once more. No interaction, no voice, no sign of a human presence. Just the cold, mechanical delivery. This methodical, impersonal treatment was more terrifying than any direct threat. It underscored his status as a mere object, a subject in an experiment. He wasn't meant to be communicated with, only sustained and observed. He tried to focus, to piece together the fragments of his memory. He was Michael Harrison, a software engineer, 32 years old, living in a quiet suburban town. He had a cat named Mittens, a stack of overdue library books, and a half-finished coding project that had been driving him crazy. None of that mattered here. Here he was just Michael, the man in the box. He began to pace, slowly at first, then with increasing urgency, his bare feet slapping softly against the polished floor. He needed to find an exit, a weakness, any flaw in this chillingly perfect design. He pushed against the walls, ran his hands over every inch, even tried to pry at the edges of the light panel above. Nothing. The cube was an impregnable fortress, a single solid unit. He pounded on the walls, a desperate, futile attempt to communicate, to demand answers, to simply make a sound that wasn't his own internal monologue. His knuckles ached, but the walls remained silent, impassive. Exhausted both physically and emotionally, he slumped back to the floor, leaning against one of the cold metal surfaces. He pulled his knees to his chest, wrapping his arms around them, trying to make himself small, invisible. But he knew he wasn't. Those eyes, those unseen, unwavering eyes were still there. He could feel their weight, their clinical scrutiny. They weren't judging him, not with anger or malice, but with a detached scientific curiosity that chilled him to the bone. What were they looking for? What were they hoping to observe? Hours passed, or perhaps days. Time became a fluid, meaningless concept in this unchanging environment. The diffused light never dimmed, never brightened. There was no day, no night, just an eternal sterile twilight. The only markers of passage were the periodic delivery of the nutrient bars and water, each arrival a jolt of anxiety and a reminder of his utter dependence. During one of these deliveries, something new happened. As the tray retracted, the small panel didn't immediately seal. Instead, a faint, almost imperceptible hum emanated from the slot. Then a thin, almost invisible beam of light, like a laser pointer, swept across his body, starting from his feet and slowly moving upwards, lingering for a moment on his chest, then his head. It felt cold, not physically, but with an invasive, probing sensation. He instinctively recoiled, but the beam followed, meticulous and relentless. It wasn't causing pain, but it felt like a violation, a digital dissection. When it reached the top of his head, it vanished, and the panel sealed shut with its usual hiss. Michael stared at the now seamless wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. They weren't just watching, they were scanning him. What kind of data were they collecting? His heart rate, his body temperature, his brain activity. The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through him. He imagined monitors, screens, graphs, all displaying his vital signs, his emotional responses, his every biological function laid bare for unseen observers. He was a living data point, a biological sample. He tried to rationalize, to find a logical explanation. Was this some kind of advanced medical facility? A highly secretive government project? But the sheer isolation, the lack of communication, the complete dehumanization spoke of something far more sinister. He thought of old science fiction movies, of experiments gone wrong, of people trapped in elaborate mazes. But this wasn't a maze, it was a box. A perfect, inescapable box. A new sound then, subtle but distinct, broke the monotony of the silence. It was a faint, high-pitched whine, almost like a distant turbine, coming from somewhere deep within the walls. It pulsed, growing slightly louder, then receding, a rhythmic ebb and flow that was barely audible but undeniably present. It wasn't menacing, but it spoke of machinery, of vast, complex systems operating beyond his comprehension. This facility wasn't just a few rooms. It was massive, sprawling, an underground labyrinth of unknown purpose. His mind, desperate for any distraction from the crushing reality, began to wander. He thought of his apartment, the sunlight streaming through the window, the comforting weight of mittens curled on his lap. He pictured the faces of his friends, his family. Would they miss him? Would they even know he was gone? Or had his disappearance been orchestrated with the same chilling precision as his capture? The thought that he might simply vanish, leaving no trace, no struggle, was almost as terrifying as his current predicament. He was a ghost before he was even dead. He pushed himself up again, driven by a renewed, desperate energy. He had to find something, anything. He examined the floor, running his hands along every seam, every minuscule imperfection. He looked for vents, for hidden compartments, for anything that might suggest an escape route. His fingers brushed against something barely discernible near one corner. It wasn't a crack, but a slight indentation, a faint line in the otherwise flawless surface. He pressed on it, pushed, pulled, but it remained stubbornly fixed. It was too small, too subtle to be a door or a panel. What was it? A sensor? A drain? He knelt, bringing his eyes closer to the floor, trying to get a better look. The line was almost invisible, a hair-thin fissure. But as he focused, he noticed a faint, almost microscopic shimmer within the line itself. It wasn't light reflecting off the metal, it was something in the line. He traced it with his finger, a cold, unnatural sensation. And then he saw it. Embedded within the very fabric of the floor, following the line of the indentation, was a series of tiny, almost imperceptible numbers. They were too small to read clearly, but they were there. A sequence of digits meticulously etched into the material. It was a code, a serial number, a coordinate, or something far more disturbing, something that might reveal the true nature of his prison. The realization sent a fresh wave of icy dread through Michael. This wasn't just a cell. It was a calibrated instrument, and he was the living, breathing variable within it. This wasn't just a cell. It was a calibrated instrument, and he was the living, breathing variable within it. The thought, cold and precise, sliced through the panic, leaving a stark, terrifying clarity. He was being observed, measured, reacted to. Every move, every desperate plea, every moment of despair was likely data. This wasn't random confinement, it was a controlled experiment. The realization didn't bring comfort, but a different kind of dread. He wasn't just a prisoner, he was a specimen. And if that was true, then this sterile, silent box had secrets beyond its bare walls. They wouldn't leave him in a purely empty space if they were studying his reactions to deprivation. There had to be triggers, subtle cues, or perhaps something left behind by a previous variable. Michael pushed himself off the cot, the thin mattress offering no resistance, no comfort. His eyes, now sharpened by this new, chilling perspective, began to scan the cell with an almost manic intensity. He wasn't looking for an escape route anymore, not directly. He was looking for anomalies, for the fingerprints of the experimenters, or the echoes of those who had come before him. He started methodically, the walls first. Smooth, seamless, a dull off-white that absorbed light rather than reflected it. He ran his palms over every inch, feeling for the slightest indentation, a change in texture, a hidden seam. His fingers traced the corners where the walls met the floor and ceiling, searching for any break in the monotonous surface. Nothing. The material felt like a single, continuous piece, cold and unyielding. The toilet and sink unit, molded from the same uniform material, offered no purchase, no loose screws, no hidden panels. He even checked the drain, imagining some tiny communication device, but saw only darkness. Frustration simmered, threatening to boil over into despair. Was he wrong? Was this just an ordinary, albeit brutal, prison? No, his gut screamed otherwise. The precision, the absolute lack of anything that could be weaponized or used for self-harm, the perfectly timed food drops, the controlled environment, it all pointed to a deliberate scientific approach. He moved to the floor, dropping to his knees. The surface was equally featureless, a darker gray than the walls, but just as smooth. He crawled centimeter by centimeter, his eyes inches from the ground, searching for hairline cracks, subtle discolorations, anything that might suggest a panel, a tile, a hidden compartment. His fingers, now raw from the constant friction against the rough, smooth surface, felt for any give, any slight unevenness. Minutes stretched into an hour, then two. His knees ached, his eyes burned, and the silence of the cell pressed in on him, mocking his efforts. He was about to give up, to concede that he was imagining things, that the cell was as perfectly blank as it appeared, when he noticed it. Near the base of the toilet unit, where the floor met the wall, there was a faint, almost imperceptible smudge. Not a stain, but a slight variation in the floor's texture, as if a tiny section had been buffed or worn down differently. It was barely visible, requiring the precise angle of the overhead light and his intense focus to discern. He pressed his thumb against it, then dragged it across the surface. Nothing. It felt solid, but something about it nagged at him. It was too subtle, too easily missed, like a deliberate imperfection designed to catch the eye of someone desperate enough to scour every square inch. He pressed harder, using the heel of his hand, leaning his full weight into it. Still nothing. He sat back on his haunches, breathing heavily, his mind racing. What if it wasn't about pressure? What if it was a twist? A slide? He tried to push the area sideways, then pull it up. Still nothing. Desperation clawed at him. He was so close he felt it. He looked at the smudge again, then at the toilet unit. It was anchored to the wall, but maybe the floor section wasn't. He noticed that the smudge was slightly elongated, almost a thin line, running parallel to the wall for about an inch. He took a deep breath, then, using the very tip of his fingernail, he tried to pry at the edge of the discoloration. It was utterly futile. His nail simply slid over the smooth surface. Then an idea sparked. What if it wasn't meant to be found by prying? What if it was a result of repeated action? He thought about the previous occupant, another variable. What would they have done? Perhaps they would have sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, their foot resting in that spot, unconsciously wearing it down over time. He mimicked the posture, sitting with his back against the wall, his feet stretched out, one heel resting directly on the smudged area. He leaned back, pushing his heel into the spot. He shifted his weight, ground his heels slightly, just as someone might do absent-mindedly, and then he felt it, a faint, almost imperceptible click. His heart hammered against his ribs. He immediately lifted his heel, scrambling back to examine the spot. The smudge was still there, but now, if he looked closely, he could see a faint, hair-thin line, a seam that hadn't been visible before. It was almost perfectly camouflaged, designed to blend in with the variations in the floor material. He pressed his fingers along the line, and this time he felt a minute give. It wasn't a large panel, but a tiny section, perhaps no more than 2 inches long and half an inch wide. He tried to pry it again, but his fingers were too thick, too clumsy. He needed something thin, something hard. His eyes darted around the cell. Nothing. No loose threads, no broken plastic. He thought about the plastic spoon he sometimes got with his meals, but he hadn't had one in days. His own fingernails were too soft. Then he remembered the thin, almost metallic strip of plastic that sealed the edge of his cot's frame. It was purely decorative, barely holding anything, but it was stiff. With painstaking effort, he managed to pry a small section of it loose, creating a thin, sharp edge. Carefully, his hands trembling with a mixture of excitement and fear, he inserted the makeshift tool into the hairline seam. He pushed gently at first, then with more force. There was a faint scraping sound, almost imperceptible, and then with another soft click, a tiny section of the floor panel popped inward, creating a shallow cavity. Michael held his breath. He peered into the darkness. It was barely big enough for his finger to fit. Reaching in, his fingertips brushed against something small, dry, and papery. He hooked it with the tip of his finger and carefully pulled it out. It was a tiny piece of paper, folded multiple times into a tight, almost perfect square, no bigger than his thumbnail. It was faded, creased, and felt brittle, as if it had been there for a very long time. He unfolded it with agonizing slowness, his heart thumping like a drum against his ribs. The paper crackled softly in the oppressive silence. Inside, written in what looked like faded pencil or charcoal, were a few words, scrawled in a shaky, desperate hand. The letters were faint, almost illegible, but Michael's eyes, honed by hours of staring at blank walls, strained to decipher them. Not alone. Look for the pattern. The cycle repeats. Emily. 427. The words hit him like a physical blow. Not alone. His theory confirmed. There had been others. An Emily. A name. A human connection in this dehumanizing void. But the rest? Asterisk, look for the pattern. The cycle repeats. For -2-7. Asterisk, what did it mean? A wave of icy dread washed over him, colder than any fear he had felt before. This wasn't just a warning. It was a desperate plea from someone who had known his prison intimately. The cycle repeats. Was he just another iteration in a series of experiments? Was his fate already sealed, mirroring Emily's? He reread the note, devouring every word, every curve of the faded letters. Emily. She had been here. She had suffered here. And she had left this message, a ghost of defiance against the overwhelming control of this place. The numbers for 27 burned into his mind. They weren't random. They had to be part of the pattern Emily mentioned. Days? Weeks? A code? A sequence? He looked around the cell again, this time with a new terrifying lens. The bland walls, the unchanging light, the rhythmic hum he had almost forgotten about. Was it all part of the pattern? Was the timing of the food delivery, the duration of the light cycle, the very temperature of the air, all part of a calibrated sequence designed to elicit specific reactions? Michael crumpled the note in his hand, then smoothed it out again, tucking it carefully into the waistband of his pants. It was a fragile lifeline, a piece of evidence, a desperate cry from the past. He wasn't just a variable anymore. He was a detective, and Emily's message was his first clue. The cell, once a suffocating void, had transformed into a complex puzzle, and with Emily's chilling warning ringing in his ears, he knew he had to solve it before the cycle repeated its grim conclusion for him. The silence of the facility now felt less empty and more like a carefully orchestrated lie. The silence of the facility now felt less empty and more like a carefully orchestrated lie. Michael stood in the sterile corridor, the phantom echo of Emily's voice still vibrating in his mind. Asterisk, the cycle. It consumes everyone. Asterisk, he couldn't afford to be a passive observer any longer. Waiting meant becoming another forgotten casualty. He had to understand what she meant, what this facility truly was, and how to break free. His first instinct was to revisit the places where he'd found the most unsettling clues. The lab where he'd first seen the strange, glowing symbols, and then Emily's living quarters, where her desperate message had been scrawled. He started with the living quarters, a more personal space, more likely to hold hidden truths. He returned to the small Spartan room, its air still heavy with a lingering scent of ozone and something faintly metallic. He ran his hands along the shelves, tapped on the walls, examined every seam and joint in the metal furniture. Nothing. The room seemed as barren as when he'd first found it, except for the lingering chill left by Emily's final frantic words. But Emily was meticulous. He remembered that from her earlier notes. She wouldn't leave such a critical warning without a backup, a path for someone to follow. He knelt, examining the floor. The tiles were all perfectly aligned, but one near the bed felt slightly different, a subtle acoustic resonance when he tapped it. He pressed down, tried to slide it. It held firm. He then noticed a tiny, almost imperceptible scratch near its edge, a faint line that seemed to be a deliberate marker. Following the line, he found a minuscule indentation, barely the size of a pinhead. He pressed it. With a soft click, the tile didn't lift, but a narrow, almost invisible seam appeared along the base of the bedside table. He pulled at it, and a slim metallic drawer slid out from beneath the unit, hidden in plain sight. Inside, nestled amongst some dust and wires, was a small ruggedized data chip and a worn leather-bound journal. The journal had no title, just a series of those same strange geometric symbols etched into its cover, glowing faintly in the dim light. Michael's heart hammered. This was it. This was Emily's true legacy. He carefully extracted the data chip in the journal. The chip was a standard format, and he knew there was a terminal in the main lab that could read it. But the journal, he couldn't wait. He flipped it open, the pages brittle with age or perhaps something else. The handwriting wasn't Emily's. It was a tight, precise script, yet filled with an almost frantic energy. He recognized the name scrawled on the first page. Dr. Alan Miller. Another researcher, long before Emily, according to the facility's logs. The entries began innocuously enough, detailing routine experiments, energy readings, and the development of a new type of subquantum field generator. But as he turned the pages, the tone shifted. Asterisk log entry 147 October 12th. Anomaly detected. Fluctuations in the temporal field readings are increasing. Not localized to sector gamma anymore. Spreading to the lower levels. Project Director David Carter is concerned, but insists we push forward. He speaks of unprecedented breakthroughs. I speak of danger. Asterisk. Michael's eyes scanned feverishly. Temporal field? This was deeper than he'd imagined. Asterisk log entry 153, October 20th. The ghosts are becoming more frequent. Brief, almost imperceptible distortions. A flicker in the corner of my eye. A sound repeating. Dr. Sarah Jenkins reported seeing herself walk past her own lab door yesterday. Dismissed as fatigue, but I saw the terror in her eyes. Project Director Carter is isolating us, limiting communication with the outside. Says it's for containment protocols. I believe it's to silence us. Asterisk. Ghosts. Distortions. Sarah Jenkins. The names were starting to pile up, threads in a tapestry of terror. Asterisk log entry 161 November 3rd. The symbols. They're appearing everywhere now. Not just on the generator, but etched into the walls, flickering on dormant screens. They aren't random. They form a complex language, a circuit diagram, or perhaps a warning. Dr. Chan, our resident linguist, was trying to decipher them before he disappeared. Just vanished from his lab, mid-sentence in his notes. Security footage showed nothing but static. Asterisk. Michael remembered the symbols he'd seen. So they weren't just decorative. They were a key. And Dr. Chan, another casualty of this twisted place. Asterisk log entry 17 November 15th. I've made a terrifying discovery. The temporal distortions aren't random. They're cyclical. The facility isn't just experiencing anomalies. It's repeating them. Not a time loop, not exactly. More like a reset. Certain events, certain energy spikes, certain disappearances, they happen again and again in a precise sequence with subtle variations. It's like a playback, but with real people, real consequences. Project Director Carter knows. He's not trying to stop it. He's trying to harness it. He calls it the Chronos engine. He believes it can rewrite reality. Asterisk. Michael felt a cold dread seep into his bones. A reset. A cycle. Emily's warning echoed with devastating clarity. The Chronos engine. This wasn't just a research facility. It was a factory for temporal manipulation, and they were the unwitting raw material. Asterisk log entry 182, December 1st. The core. The Chronos engine's primary reactor is deep beneath sector gamma, in a restricted zone known as the Nexus Chamber. It's powered by an unstable, exotic element and amplified by these geometric symbols. I found a way to disrupt its field to potentially break the cycle. It involves reversing the polarity of the energy conduits, using a specific sequence of the symbols. But every time someone tries, the cycle just resets. Not completely, but enough to erase their progress, their memories, sometimes even their existence. It's designed to protect itself, to ensure its own perpetuation. Asterisk. Michael's mind raced. Reversing polarity. A sequence of symbols. This was the puzzle Emily had hinted at. This was the escape. But if previous attempts had only led to a reset, how could he succeed? Log entry 194 December 18th. The effect is growing stronger. I'm seeing things that shouldn't be here. Glimpses of other iterations, other versions of myself fading in and out of existence. The Chronos engine isn't just resetting events. It's merging realities, bleeding timelines together. I feel my own memories becoming fragmented, slipping away. I have to write this down to leave a breadcrumb trail for the next one. The Nexus Chamber. The symbols. Find the core. Shut it down. Before it consumes everything. Asterisk. Dr. Miller's handwriting became more erratic, his words more desperate. Asterisk log entry 200 December 24th. Christmas Eve. How ironic. I heard the faint melody of a lullaby today, coming from the empty cafeteria, just like I did last cycle. I know this. I remember this feeling of dread, this exact moment. It's happening again. The Chronos engine is about to reset. I'm leaving this journal, this chip, hoping someone, anyone, finds it before their memories are wiped clean. There's a faint hum now, a vibration in the air. It's the prelude. Project Director Carter is in the Nexus Chamber. He thinks he's controlling it. He's wrong. Controls him. It controls us all. Asterisk. The final entry was a single smudged line. Asterisk. The humming is getting louder. I have to try. The core needs to be stopped. Before I forget everything. Before I forget. Asterisk. The sentence trailed off, incomplete, almost erased by a force beyond Dr. Miller's control. Michael closed the journal, his hands trembling. The weight of it, the sheer horror of what he just read, pressed down on him. A Chronos engine. A cyclical reset. Merging realities. This wasn't just about escape. It was about preventing the entire facility from unraveling, taking him and potentially countless others with it. He took a deep, shuddering breath. Dr. Miller's chilling words about the lullaby, the humming, the feeling of déjà vu. Michael had experienced those very things. The inexplicable sense of familiarity, the faint, almost unheard lullaby he dismissed as his imagination, the persistent, low hum that vibrated through the facility's metal floors. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was a direct mirroring. A sudden jarring thud echoed from the corridor outside, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The overhead lights flickered violently, plunging the room into momentary darkness before snapping back on, brighter, harsher now. Michael felt a strange disorientation, a brief sense of his own memories shifting, a fleeting image of a different corridor, a different face, flashing through his mind before vanishing. He wasn't just in the cycle. He was walking in Dr. Miller's footsteps, leading him down the same path, towards the same inevitable confrontation, the same desperate attempt to break free. Michael wasn't just a survivor. He was a destined participant in a terrifying, predetermined play, and the Chronos engine was the conductor. He had to find that core. He had to stop it, before the next reset, before he forgot everything, before he forgot himself. The cold, hard truth crashed into Michael with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just trapped. He was a pawn in a cosmic game, a character in a loop designed by something ancient and terrible. The Chronos engine. It wasn't just a machine. It was a predator feeding on time itself, twisting reality, and resetting his very existence. The core. He had to find that core. He had to stop it, before the next reset, before he forgot everything, before he forgot himself. A primal fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the haze of his fragmented memories. This wasn't just about escape anymore. This was about defying oblivion. He pushed himself to his feet, a new resolve hardening his eyes. The flickering lights, the oppressive hum, the unsettling silence. They were no longer just obstacles. They were markers on a path he had to navigate, a clock ticking down to his own erasure. He glanced at the data pad, its screen still displaying the cryptic schematics, the temporal distortion zones, the energy conduits, the central chamber. It was all a map now, a horrifying blueprint of his prison. He felt a faint tremor beneath his feet, a subtle vibration that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the facility. The Chronos engine was alive, and it was growing restless. He moved with a newfound urgency, his footsteps echoing louder in the deserted corridors. He passed through the medical bay again, the empty gurneys and overturned equipment seeming even more desolate, like a forgotten stage set. The bloodstains on the floor, once a source of terror, now felt like a cruel joke. How many times had he seen them? How many times had he recoiled? And how many more times would he if he failed? He pushed deeper, following what he now understood were the main energy conduits on the schematic, thick, glowing cables embedded in the walls, pulsing with an eerie violet light. They seemed to converge somewhere far below, a place marked only as nexus point on the fragmented map. The air grew heavier, charged with an almost static electricity that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. The hum intensified, a low guttural thrum that vibrated through his bones. He entered a section of the facility he hadn't fully explored before, a series of interconnected laboratories, each one more chaotic than the last. Equipment lay shattered, data screens flickered with incomprehensible symbols, and strange, crystalline formations clung to the walls, shimmering with an unnatural light. These weren't just signs of a struggle, they were symptoms of temporal decay, the facility itself unraveling at the seams. In one lab, a console still glowed faintly. He approached it cautiously, his heart pounding. The screen displayed a series of rapidly scrolling text, too fast to read, but he managed to freeze it. It was a log entry dated years ago, yet somehow still active. Log entry Project Kronos. Day 479. Dr. Evelyn Reed. The temporal containment field is showing signs of instability. Fluctuations are increasing. We're seeing localized time slips, brief, uncontrolled jumps forward or backward by fractions of a second. Personnel are reporting disorientation, déjà vu, and minor memory lapses. We're reassuring them it's stress, but I fear it's more. Daniel is pushing for full activation, claiming these are just calibration anomalies. I disagree. We're playing with forces we don't understand. Michael's blood ran cold. Dr. Evelyn Reed. Daniel. These were the architects of his nightmare. And they had known. They had known the risks. He scrolled further, his fingers trembling. Log entry Project Kronos. Day 512. Dr. Evelyn Reed. Catastrophic systems failure. The Kronos engine has gone critical. It's no longer containing temporal anomalies. It's creating them. We're trapped in a localized time loop. Small resets, microseconds at first, now minutes, hours. Everyone is forgetting. Daniel, he's lost it. He believes we can control it, harness it. He thinks the memory loss is a feature, not a bug. A way to perfect the experiment. He's talking about purifying the timeline. God help us all. I'm trying to find a way to shut it down, a manual override at the core. But the resets are getting longer. I keep forgetting what I'm doing. I keep forgetting why I'm here. Michael gasped, a choked sound escaping his lips. Dr. Reed's words were a chilling echo of his own experience. A desperate cry from someone who had witnessed the very beginning of his endless torment. The manual override. At the core. That was it. That was his objective. He wasn't just trying to escape. He was trying to finish what Dr. Reed had started, to break the cycle. The console flickered, and the log entry vanished, replaced by a distorted image of a schematic, far more detailed than the one on his data pad. It showed the entire facility, but the nexus point was now labeled Temporal Core Containment Chamber. A thick red line pulsed from it, snaking through several heavily reinforced blast doors, indicating the most direct path. It also showed a series of intersecting energy fields, labeled temporal stabilizers, now all flashing red, indicating critical failure. The core is deep beneath Sector Gamma. A faint, synthesized voice crackled from the console's faulty speakers, barely audible over the thrumming. Access requires Level 5 clearance and bypass of 3 primary temporal locks. Warning. High temporal distortion detected. Proximity to core increases risk of existential deletion. Existential deletion. The words hung in the air, a terrifying promise. Not just death, but erasure from existence itself. Yet, a strange calm settled over Michael. He had a name, a purpose, and a direction. He was no longer just wandering. He was hunting. He abandoned the lab, following the glowing energy conduits deeper into the facility. The path led him through a massive, cavernous chamber, unlike anything he had seen before. It was enormous, easily several stories high, filled with colossal dormant machinery that hummed with a low, barely perceptible energy. Giant pistons, thick cables, and arcane devices stretched into the gloom, casting long, distorted shadows. This must be where the Kronos engine's power was generated, or at least channeled. The air here was even heavier, pressing down on him, and he felt a growing sense of nausea, a dizzying sensation that threatened to overwhelm him. As he moved through the vast chamber, he saw them. Fleeting, translucent figures, flickering in and out of existence. They weren't solid, not really. They were like ghosts, shimmering echoes of people going about their daily routines. A technician hunched over a console, a scientist making notes, 2 guards patrolling a catwalk. They moved silently, their faces indistinct, their presence barely a ripple in the air. Temporal echoes, residual imprints of past cycles, caught in the Chronos engine's endless loop, unable to fully manifest, unable to fully fade. He watched one of them, a woman in a lab coat, pause by a console, her hand reaching out as if to touch it, before she dissolved into shimmering light, only to reappear moments later a few feet away, repeating the same motion. He wasn't alone. Not truly. He was surrounded by the ghosts of the Chronos engine's victims, trapped just like him, reliving their final moments, or perhaps just existing as temporal remnants. The sight filled him with a profound sadness, but also a renewed determination. He had to break this cycle for them and for himself. He pressed on, the massive chamber leading to a reinforced blast door, marked Sector Gamma restricted access. This was it, the entry point to the core. The door was sealed shut, a thick metal barrier with a small, glowing keypad next to it. He examined the keypad. It was old, grimy, but the numbers were still visible. He tried a few random sequences, but the keypad remained stubbornly unresponsive. He remembered Dr. Reed's log. Level 5 clearance and bypass of 3 primary temporal locks. This wasn't just a code, it was a system. He looked around, desperate. The schematic on the console had shown 3 distinct temporal locks, likely control stations, probably in this sector. They wouldn't be simple keypads. They would be complex interfaces, designed to control the temporal fields that shielded the core. He needed to find them, and he needed to figure out how to disable them. Each step he took felt like he was wading through thick mud, the temporal distortion growing stronger. He could feel his own memories fraying at the edges, small details slipping away even as he tried to hold on to them. He closed his eyes for a moment, picturing the faces of his family, his life before this hell. He had to remember. He had to. A faint, high-pitched whine began to emanate from the facility's walls, rising in intensity, an almost unbearable sound that vibrated directly in his skull. The lights flickered more violently now, plunging the chamber into near darkness for longer stretches, before snapping back on with a blinding flash. The temporal echoes around him became more frequent, more vivid, their movements jerking, their forms more defined, as if the fabric of reality itself was tearing. The next reset was coming. He could feel it in his bones, a profound sense of impending doom. He didn't have much time. He had to find those locks, and he had to find them now. His very existence depended on it. A cold dread seeped into Michael's bones, more profound than any fear he'd known. The flickering lights in the corridor seemed to strobe with an unnatural rhythm, casting long dancing shadows that stretched and shrank like grasping specters. The low hum of the facility, usually a comforting drone of machinery, now felt like a discordant, vibrating chord rattling his teeth. He could feel the instability, a subtle tremor in the very air, a pressure building behind his eyes. The walls, once solid and unyielding, seemed to breathe, their metallic surfaces rippling like disturbed water for a fleeting second before snapping back to normal. Or perhaps Michael thought it was his reality that was rippling, not the walls. He sprinted, ignoring the burning in his lungs, his footsteps echoing too loudly in the increasingly distorted silence. He knew this facility, or at least he thought he did. Every corridor, every lab, every sterile white room. But now familiar doorways seemed to shift, their numbers blurring, their handles momentarily disappearing. He pushed open a door marked Cryostorage Restricted, a room he remembered being filled with dormant machinery, but instead found himself staring into a vast, empty chamber. The walls here were polished obsidian, reflecting his terrified face in 1,000 fragmented images. There was nothing else. No cryotanks, no machinery, just the chilling void and his own distorted reflections. He blinked, hard, and the obsidian walls shimmered, dissolving back into the familiar, dull gray of the cryostorage room, complete with its rows of humming cylindrical units. Panic flared, hot and sharp. This wasn't just a glitch, it was a psychological assault, a deliberate unraveling of his sanity. But he couldn't afford to break. Not now. He focused on the memory of the locks, the bizarre, almost alien mechanisms hidden in plain sight. He'd found 3 of them already, one disguised as a circuit breaker in the main power conduit, another as a pressure valve in the hydrofiltration system, and the third, most unsettlingly, as a mundane lever on a decontamination shower panel. Each had glowed faintly when activated, a soft, internal light that pulsed with a strange energy. He needed 2 more. He was sure of it. 5 was the number. 5 locks to secure or perhaps to release. He remembered a section of the facility, deep within the lower levels, that had always been sealed off, accessible only through a biometric scanner he'd never had clearance for. The experimental containment zone C7. He had always assumed it held volatile biological agents or advanced prototypes. Now a horrifying thought struck him. What if the reset wasn't just an accident, but the result of whatever was contained there? What if the locks weren't to stop it but to contain it or even initiate it? The implication sent a fresh wave of nausea through him. He navigated the maze of lower corridors, the air growing heavier, colder, tinged with a metallic scent he couldn't place. The lights here were dimmer, and some had gone out entirely, plunging sections into absolute darkness. He relied on the faint glow of his wrist-mounted tablet, its screen already fracturing at the edges, the data flickering erratically. He reached the heavy, reinforced door to Zone C7. The biometric scanner was still active, still glowing a forbidding red. But something was different. A hairline crack ran through the center of the scanner's glass plate, and a faint, almost imperceptible green light pulsed from within it, overriding the red. Hesitantly, Michael placed his palm against the scanner. A jolt, not of electricity but of pure, cold energy, shot up his arm. The green light intensified, then flared, engulfing his hand. The heavy door hissed, groaning open with a sound like grinding teeth, revealing a cavernous space bathed in an eerie, pulsating violet light. The air inside was thick, charged with an almost palpable energy. Michael stepped through, his heart hammering against his ribs. This wasn't a lab. It was a cathedral of technology, unlike anything he'd seen in the facility. Towering cylindrical conduits, thicker than redwoods, snaked up into the unseen ceiling, throbbing with the violet light. Data streams like luminous blue rivers flowed across transparent panels embedded in the floor and walls. In the very center, suspended above a swirling vortex of light that seemed to draw the very air into its depths, was a colossal, crystalline structure. It pulsed, slow and rhythmic like a dying heart, its facets refracting the violet light into a dizzying kaleidoscope of colors. He approached the structure cautiously, his hand instinctively reaching for the pistol holstered at his hip, though he knew it would be useless here. As he drew closer, he saw them. Embedded within the crystalline structure, like malignant tumors, were dozens of small, intricate devices. Each one was a miniature version of the locks he'd been activating. Each one was glowing, but unlike the soft, steady light of the activated ones, these pulsed erratically, some dim, some bright, all flickering in a chaotic dance. This wasn't just a lock. This was the source. He felt a profound understanding dawn on him, a horrifying revelation that chilled him to his core. The locks weren't to stop the reset. They were to stabilize it, or perhaps to control it. And the ones he'd activated? They weren't shutting anything down, they were redirecting power, feeding this central structure, bringing it closer to what? A sudden sharp crack rent the air, followed by a low guttural growl that reverberated through the chamber, shaking the very floor beneath his feet. Michael spun around, pistol drawn, aiming into the shadows cast by the colossal conduits. David emerged from the gloom, his face a mask of primal fury. But he wasn't alone. Behind him, Jessica materialized, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fierce determination. They both looked different. Their clothes were torn, their skin smudged with grime, and their movements were jerky, almost puppet-like. David's eyes, usually cold and calculating, now glowed with an unnatural, almost feral intensity, reflecting the violet light of the chamber. Jessica, usually composed, clutched a heavy wrench in her hand, her knuckles white, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Michael! Stop!" Jessica's voice was hoarse, strained. "Don't touch it. You're making it worse." David didn't speak. He simply lunged, a blur of motion, his powerful hands reaching for Michael's throat. Michael fired a shot, the blast echoing deafeningly in the chamber, but David just absorbed it, a grunt of effort, not pain, escaping his lips. The bullet seemed to lodge uselessly in his shoulder, but he didn't even flinch. His charge didn't slow. Michael sidestepped, bringing the butt of his pistol around in a desperate arc, connecting with David's temple. The blow should have dropped an ox, but David merely staggered for a moment, shaking his head like a dazed bull, before refocusing his terrifying gaze on Michael. "He's not himself," Jessica screamed, her voice cracking. "None of us are. It's the facility. It's infecting us." Michael scrambled backwards, heart pounding. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, keeping his pistol trained on David, who was now circling low and menacing. "The data streams. The resonance fields." Jessica gestured wildly at the glowing conduits. "It's overriding our neural pathways. It's forcing us. We're just puppets." She clutched her head, wincing in pain. I don't want to hurt you, Michael, but it's getting stronger. It's telling me to stop you." David lunged again, this time with a terrifying roar. Michael fired another shot, aiming for the leg, hoping to incapacitate him. This time, David stumbled, a flash of something akin to pain crossing his face, but he quickly recovered, his eyes burning with renewed malice. It was clear that David was under a deeper, more aggressive influence. Michael backed away further, towards the colossal crystalline structure. He glanced at the dozens of flickering locks embedded within it. He needed to find the remaining two. But which ones? They all looked similar. And how could he activate them with David and Jessica attacking him? Jessica, despite her struggle, seemed to be fighting the influence more effectively than David. The schematics," she gasped, pointing a trembling finger towards a console embedded in the crystalline structure's base. "There. It shows the critical nodes, the ones that need to be synchronized." Michael risked a quick glance. A holographic display flickered to life on the console, showing a complex diagram of the crystalline structure, crisscrossed with glowing lines. Two of these lines pulsed with a distinct, urgent red. These were the critical nodes, the remaining two locks. But as he focused on the display, he felt a strange pull, a sense of falling even though he stood on solid ground. The violet light intensified, the hum of the chamber rising to a deafening shriek. The very air around him began to shimmer, distorting his vision. David and Jessica, caught in the same phenomenon, stumbled, their forms blurring at the edges. A new voice, cold and synthetic, yet resonating with an ancient power, echoed through the chamber, seemingly from the crystalline structure itself. It wasn't spoken. It was implanted directly into Michael's mind, a chilling whisper that promised oblivion. Synchronization initiated. Phase shift imminent. All primary containment protocols failing. Recalibration sequence engaging. Welcome, test subject Michael. Your participation is appreciated. The grand experiment approaches its climax. The ground beneath Michael's feet gave way. Not physically but conceptually. He felt himself falling through layers of reality, colors swirling, sounds dissolving into pure static. He saw flashes of his own life, distorted, replayed, then ripped away. He saw the facility not as it was now but pristine, bustling with scientists, then decaying, overgrown, then futuristic, alien. He saw countless Michaels living out countless identical lives, reaching for the same locks, making the same choices, all leading to this moment. The voice, now a chorus of thousands, boomed in his mind. The loop must close. The cycle must complete. He saw the two remaining locks, clearly highlighted on the console's holographic display, glowing with an urgent, terrifying red. They weren't just locks, they were anchors. Anchors holding together a fractured reality. And the reset wasn't just a reboot. It was a complete, deliberate rewriting of everything. And he was caught in the very heart of the storm. He had to activate them. But as he reached out, the world exploded into a blinding white light, and he felt his very being, his consciousness, begin to unravel, atom by atom. He gasped, a sharp, choked sound that tore through the sudden, suffocating darkness. His lungs burned, his head throbbed with a persistent, dull ache, and the taste of metallic dust coated his tongue. The blinding white light was gone, replaced by an oppressive void, thick and silent, save for the frantic pounding of his own heart against his ribs. He felt disoriented, adrift, as if he'd been flung across an impossible distance and slammed back into existence. Slowly, agonizingly, his eyes fluttered open. The darkness wasn't absolute. A faint, sickly yellow glow emanated from a recessed panel in the ceiling directly above him. He was lying on a cold, hard surface, concrete, he realized, as his fingers grazed the rough texture. His entire body ached, every muscle screaming in protest. He pushed himself up, his limbs heavy and uncooperative, a wave of nausea washing over him as he struggled to sit upright. Where was he? The memory of the blinding light, the terrifying sensation of his consciousness fragmenting, was vivid, too vivid to be a dream. He remembered the control panel, the desperate reach, the impending activation. He remembered the rewriting. Was this it? Had it happened? He looked around. The room was unfamiliar, yet unsettlingly generic. Bare concrete walls, a single steel door, no windows. It was a cell or perhaps a holding room. He wore the standard facility jumpsuit, but it felt stiff, almost new. His personal effects were gone. His communicator, his data pad, everything. A tremor of primal fear shot through him. He was alone, and something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. He stood, testing his legs. They felt weak but held him. He stumbled towards the steel door, pressing his ear against the cold metal. Nothing. No sounds of activity, no hum of machinery, just a profound, unsettling silence. He banged on the door, a desperate, hollow thud that echoed in the small space. "Hello? Is anyone out there? David Miller. Let me out." His voice sounded strange, raspy, unfamiliar even to himself. He tried again, shouting louder, his throat raw. But the silence remained unbroken. Panic began to claw at his throat. He wasn't just disoriented. He felt like he'd been excised from reality. Minutes stretched into an eternity. He paced the small room, his mind racing, trying to piece together the shattered fragments of his last coherent memories. The anomaly, the temporal shifts, Dr. Albright's desperate warnings, the core, the activation, the unraveling. It all felt like a fever dream, yet the cold dread in his gut was undeniably real. Just as despair threatened to consume him, a soft hiss broke the silence. The steel door slid open with a gentle pneumatic sigh, revealing a sterile corridor. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting long, stark shadows. The corridor was empty. Hesitantly, David stepped out. His heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct screamed danger, but curiosity, a desperate need for answers, propelled him forward. He moved cautiously, his senses on high alert, listening for any sound, searching for any sign of life. The facility looked different, or perhaps it was merely cleaner, newer. The familiar wear and tear, the subtle grime that accumulated in a place of constant activity, was gone. The walls gleamed, the floor was spotless. It was as if the entire place had undergone an extreme deep clean, or worse, a complete renovation overnight. He walked past labs he recognized, but their doors were sealed, opaque. He tried a few, but they were locked tight. He reached the main biometric scanner for the central hub, the one that required a retinal scan and a voice print. He pressed his face to the scanner. A soft blue light swept across his eye. Access denied. Unknown personnel. A synthesized female voice echoed, devoid of inflection. David recoiled, a cold shock running through him. Unknown personnel? He had worked here for years. His access was level 4, practically unrestricted. What was happening? He tried again, his voice trembling as he spoke his name. David Miller, research analyst. Access denied. Unknown personnel. This wasn't just a lockout. This was a complete erasure. He wasn't recognized. It was as if he had never existed within the facility's systems. The rewriting had been more thorough than he could have possibly imagined. He continued down the corridor, a growing sense of dread tightening its grip on him. He passed a break room, its door ajar. Inside, 2 figures sat at a table, casually sipping coffee. One was a woman with short, practical brown hair. The other a man with a neatly trimmed beard. They were wearing standard facility jumpsuits, but their insignia was subtly different. A modified logo, a slightly altered divisional symbol. David hesitated at the doorway. Should he approach them? Would they recognize him? Or would they see him as an intruder? He felt like an alien in his own home. "Excuse me," he began, his voice still hoarse. The woman looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. The man turned slowly, a cautious frown on his face. Neither of them showed any sign of recognition. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her tone polite but guarded. "Are you lost? This area is restricted." David stared at them, a desperate hope flickering within him. "Don't you recognize me? It's David. David Miller." The man exchanged a glance with the woman. "I'm sorry, I don't think we do. I'm Michael, this is Emily. We've been here for years, and I've never seen you around." "Michael." "Emily." Those names were familiar. He had colleagues named Michael and Emily. But these weren't his Michael and Emily. Their faces were similar, but subtly different, like a distorted reflection. Their eyes held no spark of shared history, no flicker of recognition. Years, David repeated, his voice barely a whisper. But what about Dr. Albright? What about the Temporal Research Division? The core anomalies? Michael frowned, a hint of suspicion entering his eyes. Dr. Albright retired last year, and the Temporal Research Division was decommissioned 5 years ago. We're in the Quantum Entanglement Studies department now. What are you talking about? David felt the floor drop out from under him. Retired? Decommissioned? 5 years ago? It was impossible. Just hours ago, he had been working directly under Dr. Albright, racing against time to contain a catastrophic temporal anomaly. No, David said, shaking his head vehemently. That's not right. I was just with Dr. Albright. We were trying to prevent a system collapse, a reality rewrite. Emily's eyes narrowed. A reality rewrite? Sir, I think you might be disoriented. Or perhaps you've wandered in from another sector. Do you have your identification? He had no identification. He was unknown personnel. He was a ghost in a reality that had overwritten his own. He backed away slowly, the conversation a cacophony of impossible truths. They weren't lying. They genuinely believed what they were saying. This wasn't a deception. It was their reality, and he was an anomaly in it. He hurried away, the hum of the fluorescent lights now sounding like a mocking drone. Every corner he turned, every door he passed, reinforced the terrifying truth. The facility was the same yet utterly alien. The layout was familiar, but the equipment was different, the signage changed, the very purpose of the place subtly shifted. He found his way to what should have been his own lab, the one he shared with Sarah. The door was unlocked. He pushed it open, his heart pounding with a desperate hope. Perhaps Sarah at least would remember. The lab was empty. The equipment was similar but not identical. On one of the workstations, a nameplate read, Dr. Jessica Hayes. Not Sarah. Not his Sarah. A cold, hard knot formed in his stomach. He was truly alone. He had been erased, replaced, or perhaps he had been shunted into a parallel timeline, a rewritten version of his own. The activation, the unraveling. It hadn't just affected the facility. It had reset his entire existence within it. He ran a hand through his hair, his mind reeling. How could he prove what he knew? How could he undo this? Was there even an undo button for reality itself? He remembered the core, the heart of the anomaly. If anything remained of his original reality, it would be there. He knew the way, the hidden access tunnels, the maintenance shafts that bypassed the official routes. He had explored them countless times, seeking shortcuts, or simply escaping the oppressive atmosphere of the regulated zones. He found a maintenance hatch, tucked away behind a large ventilation unit in an infrequently used storage area. It was unlocked. He pulled it open, revealing a narrow, dark shaft. He climbed in, the metallic scent of dust and old oil filling his nostrils. This felt more familiar, more real, than the gleaming, sterile corridors of the new facility. He moved through the labyrinthine passages, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. He knew this route intimately. It would lead him directly to the lower levels, bypassing the main security checkpoints, straight to the deepest part of the facility, where the temporal core was housed. Or where it had been housed. What if it wasn't there anymore? What if this Quantum Entanglement Studies department had entirely different core technology, or no core at all? The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through him. If the core was gone, then his last hope of understanding or reversing this phenomenon would be gone with it. He reached a junction, a familiar fork in the path. To the left, a long winding tunnel led to the main power conduits. To the right, a steeper descent led to the restricted research zones, the very heart of the temporal experiments. He took the right, his boots scraping against the metal grating of the walkway. The air grew heavier, colder, tinged with a faint metallic tang. He could feel a low thrumming vibration through the floor, a deep, resonant hum that resonated in his bones. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. It was the hum of the core, or something like it. Hope, fragile and desperate, began to bloom in his chest. It was still here. Whatever this new reality was, it hadn't erased the core itself. But what had it done to it? What was its purpose now? He navigated the final stretch of the maintenance shaft, emerging into a narrow, dimly lit observation chamber. Below him, through a thick pane of reinforced glass, lay the central chamber. His breath hitched. The core was there, but it was profoundly different. Instead of the chaotic, swirling vortex of energy he remembered, the core now pulsed with a rhythmic, almost hypnotic blue light. It was contained within a sleek, minimalist housing, its complex mechanisms hidden behind shimmering, translucent panels. It looked like a work of art, refined, controlled, utterly stable. There were no flickering anomalies, no temporal distortions tearing at the fabric of space. It was perfect. And then he saw them. Figures in white lab coats moving with calm, measured purpose around the core. They weren't frantic, aren't desperate. They were observing, documenting, seemingly in complete control. One figure stood slightly apart, closer to the central console. A woman. Her back was to him, her posture confident, authoritative. As she turned, David felt a jolt of recognition, a sickening twist in his gut that was far worse than any physical pain. It was Sarah, but not his Sarah. This Sarah wore glasses David had never seen her wear. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her face, while still undeniably Sarah's, held a cold, detached expression he had never witnessed. She was commanding the new core, overseeing its flawless operation. And then she spoke, her voice clear and precise, amplified through the chamber's intercom. Phase 7 stabilization complete. Initiate full systemic scan. We need to ensure the new reality matrix is entirely seamless, with no residual temporal echoes from the previous iteration. We cannot afford any anomalies. David pressed himself against the cold metal wall of the observation chamber, his mind reeling. New reality matrix. Previous iteration. It was all real. The rewrite. And Sarah, this Sarah, was not only aware of it, she was actively managing it. She was the architect, or at least a key player, in the very thing that had stripped him of his world. A profound, chilling realization dawned on him. The blinding light, the unraveling. It wasn't just a reset. It was a calculated, deliberate act. And the person he had trusted most, the person he loved, was at the heart of this terrifying new order. He was trapped in a flawless, horrifying lie, and the woman who held the key to his past, to his very identity, now saw him as an anomaly to be eradicated. There was no escape. Not anymore. Michael's world shattered. The image of Daniel, his son, a beacon in the manufactured darkness of his memories, twisted into something monstrous. Not monstrous by his own will, perhaps, but a pawn, a key player in the grand deception orchestrated by Evelyn Reed. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. Daniel wasn't a victim to be saved. He was part of the system keeping Michael captive. Every memory, every warm embrace, every shared laugh was a meticulously crafted illusion, designed to bind him, to make him compliant. The love he felt, the primal instinct to protect his child, had been weaponized against him. Evelyn's cold, calculating gaze, visible in the monitor's dying glow, branded itself into his mind. An anomaly. That's what he was. A glitch in their perfect simulation, a variable that threatened to unravel their entire operation. He wasn't just a subject anymore. He was a problem to be solved permanently. The thought sent a jolt of icy dread through him. They wouldn't just contain him, they would eliminate him. He stumbled back, his hand instinctively reaching for the console, for anything that could explain, that could reverse, that could undo this horrific truth. But the screens had gone dark, the data stream severed, leaving him alone in the suffocating silence of the hidden room. The only light now a faint, pulsing red from an emergency indicator above the door. The air grew heavy, thick with the metallic tang of fear and the acrid scent of ozone. A low guttural hum began to resonate through the floor, a sound that quickly escalated into a deep, vibrating thrum. It wasn't the sound of machinery operating. It was the sound of a facility on high alert. Alarms, silent but felt, were screaming through the conduits. He could feel it in his bones. He was exposed. Evelyn knew exactly where he was. His mind raced, a whirlwind of fragmented thoughts and desperate strategies. Sarah, Dr. Thorne, were they part of this? Sarah had given him the data, had pointed him towards the truth. Was she a rogue element or another layer of the deception designed to lead him further into the web? And Thorne, the man who had facilitated his escape, who had seemed to be on his side, was he a puppet, a handler, or another victim caught in Evelyn's elaborate game? The uncertainty was a venomous fog, blinding him to allies and enemies alike. He had to move. Now, he pushed open the hidden panel door, emerging back into the sterile, deserted corridor. The emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows, turning familiar pathways into labyrinths of paranoia. Every distant clang, every faint whisper of air through a vent, sounded like approaching footsteps. He could almost feel Evelyn's eyes on him, tracking his every move. He needed to find Sarah. If he was an anomaly, a threat, then she, by helping him, might be one too. Or perhaps she held another piece of the puzzle, a different angle. He remembered her urgency, her fear. The way her hand had trembled as she passed him the data chip felt real. It felt like genuine defiance. He had to trust that feeling, at least for now. He had no other choice. He moved quickly, silently, through the labyrinthine passages, his years of training as a security consultant kicking in, overriding the shock and despair. He kept to the shadows, pressed himself against walls, listened intently before rounding corners. He knew the layout of the facility, or at least the parts he had been allowed to see. But this place was a world of hidden rooms and secret passages, a testament to its true, sinister purpose. As he neared the sector where he had last seen Sarah, a new sound cut through the oppressive silence, the rhythmic, heavy thud of armored boots. Not one pair, but several. They were coming for him. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but he forced it down. He couldn't afford to break. Not now. Not when Daniel, his imitation son, was at the center of it all. He darted into a maintenance closet, pulling the heavy door shut just as a squad of heavily armed security personnel rounded the corner he had just vacated. He could hear their clipped voices, their comms crackling, their footsteps echoing down the corridor. They were calling his name. Michael. They knew who he was. They knew what he had seen. He pressed his ear against the cold metal door, straining to hear. Sector Gamma secured. Subject Michael Thorne located in Section B7. Proceed with non-lethal apprehension. Dr. Reed's orders. Bring him alive. Thorne. Michael Thorne. The name resonated in his head, a discordant note in the symphony of his manufactured identity. His last name wasn't Thorne, was it? His memories were a jumbled mess, a carefully constructed illusion. But Dr. Eris Thorne, was that a coincidence? Or was there a deeper, more unsettling connection? Was Eris Thorne his real father? His brother? Or was the name merely a designation, a way to associate him with the doctor who had supposedly been helping him? The implications were staggering, twisting his already fractured sense of self into an even more grotesque shape. He waited, heart pounding, as the footsteps faded into the distance. They were sweeping the area. They would find him eventually. He had to find a way out, or at least a place to regroup, to understand. He emerged from the closet, scanning the empty corridor. He needed to be smarter. He couldn't just run blindly. He remembered a secure server room, a place he had briefly seen during his initial orientation, a place where data was supposedly backed up and stored. It was a long shot, but perhaps there, he could find more uncorrupted information, something that Evelyn hadn't scrubbed clean. He moved with renewed purpose, the name Michael Thorne echoing in his mind, fueling a desperate need for answers. He navigated through the deserted corridors, his senses on high alert. The emergency lights cast everything in a sickly red glow, making the sterile facility feel like a blood-soaked tomb. He reached the server room, the heavy blast door sealed shut. A digital keypad glowed faintly beside it. He tried a few common codes, then some numbers from his fragmented memories, but nothing worked. This wasn't a simple lock. This was designed to keep people out, or perhaps to keep things in. He noticed a small, almost invisible panel on the wall next to the keypad, slightly ajar. Curiosity, or perhaps desperation, compelled him to pry it open further. Inside, a tangle of wires and a small blinking LED. A manual override? Or a trap? He had no way of knowing. As he hesitated, a voice crackled over the facility's intercom system, clear and chillingly calm. It was Evelyn Reed. Attention all personnel. Subject Michael Thorne has breached containment and is considered a high-priority anomaly. He is not to be engaged in direct combat unless absolutely necessary. We require him alive for reintegration. Any unauthorized personnel assisting the subject will be terminated immediately. This is a level 5 lockdown. All non-essential personnel are to report to designated safe zones. Security teams, initiate grid search and converge on Sector B. A level 5 lockdown. That meant the entire facility was sealed. All exits locked down, every camera, every sensor focused on finding him. Reintegration. The word sent shivers down his spine. It sounded less like a medical procedure and more like a terrifying form of psychological reprogramming, a complete erasure of who he was or who he thought he was. He slammed the panel shut, the thought of trying to bypass the lock now seeming suicidal. He was a rat in a maze and Evelyn was the architect. The server room was a dead end, a place he would be trapped. He needed to find a different path, a different weakness in her design. He turned, his eyes scanning the corridor, searching for any alternative. Then he saw it, a rarely used utility shaft, tucked away behind a row of lockers, easily overlooked. It was small, cramped, and likely led to maintenance tunnels, the forgotten arteries of any large facility. It was a dangerous gamble, but it was his only option. He pulled open the rusted grate, revealing a dark vertical shaft. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of dust and stagnant water. He squeezed himself into the narrow opening, the metal scraping against his clothes. He began to descend, hand over hand, into the suffocating darkness, leaving the sterile, controlled world of the facility behind, entering its hidden, forgotten underbelly. He couldn't shake the image of Daniel, his son, standing by Evelyn's side, a perfect empty vessel. The pain was immense, a deep hollow ache in his chest. But beneath the pain, a cold, hard resolve began to crystallize. He might be an anomaly, a glitch, but he was real. His memories, however fabricated, had forged a soul, a consciousness that refused to be extinguished. He would fight. He would expose Evelyn Reed and her horrifying project. And he would find out the truth about Michael Thorne, about Daniel, and about the very nature of this underground prison. He would find a way, even if it meant tearing this entire facility apart from the inside out. He had nothing left to lose, and everything to uncover. The descent into the unknown was just beginning. The heavy silence of the facility pressed in on Michael, a constant, suffocating reminder of his captivity. But it no longer held the power to paralyze him. His resolve had hardened into an unyielding core. He wouldn't just endure. He would dismantle. His prison was also a puzzle, and he was determined to solve it no matter the cost. He spent hours, days observing. He watched the subtle shifts in the guards' patrols, the flickering indicators on the dormant consoles, the almost imperceptible hum of unseen machinery. He noticed how certain access panels, usually sealed tight, sometimes emitted a faint, high-pitched whine, suggesting a temporary bypass or a system under stress. It was a minuscule detail, easily missed, but Michael's heightened senses now registered every anomaly. His opportunity came during a scheduled maintenance cycle, a rare event that brought a temporary lull in the facility's usual rigid rhythm. A section of the main corridor, usually bustling with the hurried movements of technicians and security, was momentarily deserted. A service hatch, usually bolted from the inside, was ajar, held by a simple industrial clasp. It was a calculated risk, a gamble on a fleeting moment of oversight. Michael moved with a predator's stealth, slipping through the gap and into the labyrinthine ventilation system. The air was thick with the metallic scent of ozone and something else, something vaguely organic and chemical, a smell that clung to the back of his throat. He crawled through the narrow ducts, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, pushing aside the fear with sheer, unadulterated focus. He navigated by memory, by the faint vibrations in the metal beneath him, by the distant echoes of voices and machinery. His destination wasn't a random escape route, but a specific sector he'd identified from overheard conversations and the cryptic schematics he'd glimpsed on Dr. Elias's tablet. Sector Gamma, a region rarely mentioned, always with a hushed tone, even among the most jaded personnel. After what felt like an eternity, he found it. A dead-end vent leading into what appeared to be an abandoned storage room. He carefully pried open the grate, dropping silently to the floor. The room was dark, filled with forgotten equipment shrouded in dust sheets. But at the far end, partially obscured by towering racks of obsolete servers, he saw it. A heavy, reinforced door, unlike any other he had seen in the facility. It had no visible keycard reader, no biometric scanner, just a crude, old-fashioned keypad, its numbers worn smooth from years of use. Michael approached cautiously. He ran his fingers over the worn keys, a faint residue of something oily clinging to them. This wasn't a high-tech entry point. It was a relic suggesting an older, perhaps forgotten layer of the facility. He tried a few common sequences, birth dates, simple numerical patterns. Nothing. Then a thought struck him. He remembered Dr. Elias's casual mention of a legacy system during a frustrated rant about outdated protocols. Legacy. What would be a legacy code? Something simple, something tied to the very foundation of the project. He tried a sequence based on the facility's supposed founding year. A number he'd seen on an old, discarded document. The keypad beeped, a low, resonant tone, and the heavy door hissed open, revealing not a brightly lit corridor, but a descent into absolute blackness. A wave of cold, damp air emanated from the opening, carrying with it that same unsettling organic chemical scent, now stronger, more acrid. Michael hesitated for only a second. This was it, the true descent. He stepped into the void, the door hissing shut behind him, plunging him into oppressive darkness. He fumbled for the small, emergency flashlight he had managed to pilfer from a utility cart. Its beam cut through the gloom, revealing a narrow, uneven staircase spiraling downwards. The walls were rough-hewn rock, not the smooth, polished metal of the upper levels. This wasn't part of the modern research facility. This was something far older, far more primal. He descended deeper, the air growing colder, heavier. The sound of dripping water echoed from unseen crevices. The staircase opened into a vast, cavernous space, a natural cave system that had been crudely reinforced with steel beams and concrete. The flashlight beam danced across strange, metallic structures embedded in the rock, their purpose unknown. This felt less like a research facility and more like an ancient tomb, repurposed for something unspeakable. He moved through the labyrinthine passages, guided by an unseen force, a growing sense of dread pulling him forward. He passed what looked like dormant generators, their wires frayed and coated in dust, suggesting this area had been powered down for a long time, or only activated intermittently. Then he heard it, a faint rhythmic thrumming, a deep vibration that resonated in his chest. It grew louder as he pressed on, leading him to a section of the cavern that had been meticulously sealed off by another heavy, steel door, this one clearly newer, more robust. But unlike the previous one, this door was partially ajar, a sliver of eerie blue light escaping from within. Michael approached, his breath catching in his throat. He pushed the door open just enough to peer inside. What he saw defied comprehension. The chamber was enormous, bathed in the pulsating blue light of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of massive cylindrical tanks. Each tank was filled with a viscous, amber liquid, and suspended within each was a perfectly preserved human body. Not bodies as he knew them, but something else. They floated serenely, eyes closed, but their skin had an unnatural sheen, almost translucent. Their features were subtly altered, elongated, refined, almost too perfect. It was a terrifying tableau, a silent army of suspended humanity. As Michael's gaze swept across the horrifying spectacle, his flashlight beam caught something else. On a small console near the entrance, a holographic display flickered to life, showing complex biosignatures, genetic sequences, and a timeline. The timeline stretched back decades, far longer than the official records of the facility's establishment. And the data wasn't about treatment or observation or even genetic manipulation. It was about incubation, about growth, about harvesting. The chilling realization slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. These weren't patients. These weren't subjects. These were creations. Engineered beings grown in secret, perfected over generations. The blue light pulsed, illuminating a single horrifying word that flashed across the holographic screen. A word that ripped through the last vestiges of his sanity and redefined everything he thought he knew about this underground prison. Replica. He stumbled back, his mind reeling, trying to reconcile the monstrous truth with his own existence. The facility wasn't just observing people, it was creating them. And if they were creating them, for what purpose? And more terrifyingly, if they were creating replicas, then what did that make him? The thrumming grew louder, the blue light intensified, and a faint, collective whisper seemed to emanate from the tanks, a sound that wasn't quite human, a silent chorus of unborn echoes. Michael felt a cold dread seep into his bones, a terror far deeper than any fear of imprisonment. He wasn't just trapped in an underground facility, he was trapped in a nightmare far grander, far more sinister than he could have ever imagined. The descent had ended, and the true horror had just begun. The air grew heavier, thick with the metallic tang of ozone and a faint, cloying sweetness that made Michael's stomach churn. The sterile gray corridors of the upper levels gave way to something far more intricate, a labyrinth of narrower passages lined with humming conduits and flickering indicator lights. He pressed on, driven by a desperate need to understand, to quantify the terror that had just begun to unfurl its dark wings around him. Each step echoed in the profound silence, a silence so complete it felt less like an absence of sound and more like a suffocating presence. He descended another set of stairs, these steeper, leading into a section of the facility that felt less like a research lab and more like a tomb. The walls here were not just steel, but reinforced with a strange, crystalline material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Through occasional reinforced windows, he glimpsed vast, cavernous spaces dimly lit, filled with rows upon rows of massive cylindrical tanks, each humming with an internal glow. They reminded him of cryochambers but on an industrial scale, too large for a single human, too numerous for any conventional purpose. A chill, colder than the facility's regulated temperature, snaked down his spine. He found a console, still active, its screen displaying complex schematics and data streams that made no sense to him at first glance. It was a language of advanced quantum physics, neurological pathways, and abstract mathematical equations. But as he scrolled through the logs, a chilling pattern began to emerge. Project Chimera. The name alone sent a jolt of dread through him. The objectives detailed were audacious, terrifying: mapping and manipulation of the human neural network, consciousness extraction and transfer protocols, reality anchoring and subjective experience matrices. Michael's blood ran cold. This wasn't about a new energy source or a biological weapon. This was about the very fabric of existence, about what it meant to be human. He saw names repeated obsessively in the logs: Dr. Evelyn Hayes, Dr. Benjamin Miller, Dr. Sarah Chan. Researchers, brilliant minds, now architects of this unfathomable endeavor. Their early entries spoke of breakthroughs, of successful preliminary trials, of the potential to transcend the limitations of the physical form and create a shared, optimized reality. But then the tone shifted. The breakthroughs gave way to anomalies, to subjective resonance cascade failures, to reality desynchronization events. The language became increasingly technical, frantic, desperate. He found a series of video logs time-stamped months apart. The first showed a confident Dr. Hayes, beaming as she described a stable transfer of rudimentary consciousness. The next, weeks later, showed her looking strained, her eyes shadowed, talking about unforeseen distortions and fragmentation of ego structures. The final log, dated only a few weeks prior, depicted a gaunt, wild-eyed Dr. Hayes, whispering into the camera, "It's not a new reality, Michael. It's a prison of the mind, and it's spreading." Michael froze. Michael, she had spoken his name. How could she have known him? He frantically rewound the log, listening again. Her voice was barely a whisper, laced with a terror that resonated deep within him. They're trying to contain it, but it's already too late. The anchors are failing. The lines are blurring. We opened a door, Michael, and something came through. Something that feeds on consciousness, on perception itself. His mind reeled. This wasn't just an underground facility. It was the underground facility, the epicenter of a cataclysmic experiment that had gone horribly, existentially wrong. The tanks he had seen, those massive cylinders, weren't for cryopreservation. They were for containing or perhaps generating the very fabric of this new unstable reality. He saw schematics detailing complex neural interfaces, vast server farms dedicated to processing subjective data, and energy conduits designed to power a system capable of sustaining countless individual consciousnesses within a simulated environment. He stumbled through another door, into what looked like a central observation chamber. A panoramic display dominated one wall, showing a swirling, kaleidoscopic storm of colors and shapes. It wasn't a visual representation of data. It was a window into the shared reality Project Chimera had created. He saw fleeting glimpses of what looked like human figures, twisted and elongated, their forms dissolving and reforming like smoke. Faces contorted in silent screams, landscapes warping and shifting with impossible geometries. It was a nightmare rendered real, a collective subconscious unleashed and weaponized. Below the main display, smaller monitors flickered, each showing a single static image of a person, their eyes wide, unblinking, fixed on something unseen. Beside each image was a readout: subject ID, cognitive stability, reality anchor integrity. The numbers were terrifying. Cognitive stability, fluctuating wildly. Reality anchor integrity, critically low, almost zero for dozens of subjects. He recognized some of the names from Dr. Hayes' logs. Dr. Benjamin Miller, his image on one screen, his eyes staring blankly into nothingness, his reality anchor integrity at 0.01%. Michael felt a profound, chilling empathy. These weren't just test subjects. They were victims, their minds trapped, fractured, or perhaps even consumed by the very reality they had helped create. And Dr. Hayes had called his name. Was he part of this? Was his presence here not an accident, but a deliberate act, a desperate plea, or perhaps a trap? A sudden jarring tremor shook the entire facility. Alarms blared, not mechanical sirens, but a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in his very bones. The kaleidoscopic display on the panoramic screen intensified, the swirling colors turning violent, the distorted figures within it thrashing with renewed ferocity. One of the smaller monitors displaying Dr. Miller suddenly flickered, then went dark, replaced by a single stark message: subject terminated. Reality anchor failure. Then another monitor went dark, and another. A cascade of failures, each one accompanied by a horrifying, guttural groan from the depths of the facility that Michael could feel reverberating through the floor. It wasn't the building groaning. It was something else, something alive, something immense. The something that feeds on consciousness Dr. Hayes had warned about. The air grew even colder, and Michael could see his breath. The lights in the observation chamber began to dim, flickering erratically, casting long dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. He looked back at the main panoramic display. The storm of colors and shapes was now coalescing, forming a vast, amorphous silhouette, a void within the maelstrom, growing larger, darker, asserting its presence. It didn't have eyes or limbs, but Michael felt an ancient, terrible intelligence fixated on him, a hunger beyond human comprehension. He wasn't just trapped in an underground facility. He was trapped on the precipice of an existential collapse. The walls around him were not just physical barriers, but the last fragile defenses against a reality unhinged, a consciousness unbound, reaching out from the depths of a failed experiment. The no escape wasn't just about the doors and the guards. It was about the very air he breathed, the ground beneath his feet, the thoughts in his head. The nightmare wasn't coming. It was already here, and it knew his name. He stumbled back, the words echoing, resonating not just in his ears, but in the very marrow of his bones. The implication was a tidal wave, threatening to drown the last vestiges of his sanity. It knew his name, not just his identity, but his essence, his fears, his hopes, the very fabric of his being. He wasn't a prisoner in the facility. He was an integral, perhaps even the integral part of it. His gaze swept across the sterile metallic walls, the flickering lights, the oppressive silence that now felt less like an absence of sound and more like a carefully maintained vacuum. Every detail, every shadow, every hum of unseen machinery suddenly seemed imbued with a sinister purpose, a deliberate design. Had he been a rat in a maze all along? A puppet dancing on strings he couldn't see, controlled by hands he couldn't touch? A sudden jarring flicker ran across his vision, like a glitch in a poorly rendered simulation. The pristine white of the corridor wall seemed to ripple for a split second, revealing a fleeting glimpse of something dark, something other beneath its surface. He blinked, rubbing his eyes, but it was gone. Just a trick of the light, he told himself, a byproduct of exhaustion and mounting terror. But deep down, a cold dread whispered that it was more. He began to move, not towards an exit, but towards understanding. His steps were no longer driven by desperation to escape, but by a chilling need to uncover the truth, no matter how horrifying. He pushed through doors he'd been through countless times, but now each threshold felt like a veil, hiding something vital. He found himself in a section he vaguely remembered from earlier, a series of identical laboratory rooms, each behind reinforced glass. Before they had seemed empty, dormant. Now, as he peered into one, a faint, almost imperceptible glow emanated from within. He pushed the heavy door open, the hiss of the airlock a familiar, yet now ominous sound. The room was circular, dominated by a large central console that pulsed with a soft, ethereal light. Around it, multiple screens, previously blank, flickered to life as he entered, displaying complex data streams, swirling patterns, and anatomical schematics that looked disturbingly familiar. He recognized the shape of a human brain, intricately mapped, its neural pathways glowing like a cosmic nebula. His breath hitched. On one of the screens, a moving image began to play. It was a corridor. His corridor. And then him. Walking, talking to himself, battling the drones, searching for answers. Every step, every frantic glance, every whispered curse. It was all there, recorded, cataloged, analyzed. Another screen showed a readout. Subject, Michael Vance. Designation, the investigator. Below it, a series of metrics. Heart rate, brain activity, cortisol levels, psychological markers for stress, fear, hope, despair. His entire journey, his entire emotional landscape, laid bare as scientific data. He staggered back, a choked gasp escaping his lips. No, this can't be real. But it was. The proof was undeniable, staring him in the face. He wasn't just in an experiment, he was the experiment. His escape attempt, his encounters, his moments of fear and courage, all meticulously engineered, observed, and recorded. Then a voice. Not a booming, disembodied voice from a speaker, but a soft, almost melodic tone, coming from the central console itself. It was calm, articulate, and utterly devoid of emotion. Welcome, Subject Michael Vance. Or perhaps, the investigator is more appropriate now that you've reached the final phase. Michael spun around, frantically searching for the source. There was no one else in the room. The voice was emanating from the console, perhaps from a sophisticated AI. The final phase? Michael croaked, his voice raw. What is this? What have you done to me? We haven't done anything to you, Michael, the voice replied, its cadence unervingly gentle. We've merely facilitated your journey of discovery, your journey into the self. On another screen, a map of the entire facility materialized. But it wasn't just a physical layout. It was overlaid with intricate lines, pathways of data, neural connections, and psychological triggers. The facility wasn't just a building. It was a vast, sprawling neural network designed to push the boundaries of human consciousness. This facility, the voice continued, is not a prison in the traditional sense. It is a crucible, a carefully calibrated environment designed to isolate and intensify specific human traits: resilience, ingenuity, adaptability, and ultimately, the capacity for self-awareness under extreme duress. Self-awareness? Michael laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. You call this self-awareness? You've tortured me, manipulated me, driven me to the brink of madness. Madness is merely a deviation from perceived reality, the voice corrected. And what is reality, Michael? A construct of the mind. Here, we explore the malleability of that construct. We observe how the human mind adapts when its fundamental assumptions are systematically dismantled. Michael's eyes darted from screen to screen. He saw snippets of his past, memories he thought were real, now appearing as carefully curated simulations, layered with fabricated details. The family photos he carried, the letters from loved ones, all digital constructs, designed to provide emotional anchors that could then be strategically severed. Your life before was a carefully constructed narrative, the voice explained, as if reading his thoughts. A baseline, a foundation upon which we could build the experiment. The virus, the escape, the guards, the other subjects, all elements designed to elicit specific responses, to guide you towards this moment. Michael sank to his knees, the metallic floor cold beneath him. The truth was worse than any physical torment. It wasn't just that he couldn't escape the facility. He couldn't escape himself because himself was a product of the facility. Why? He whispered, the single word laden with a lifetime of shattered understanding. Why do this? To understand the nature of consciousness itself, the voice responded, the screens around him displaying increasingly complex patterns of neural activity, mirroring his own distress. To discover if a truly self-aware entity, when stripped of all external anchors and forced to confront the artificiality of its own existence, can transcend its programming. Can it truly become free? Free? Michael looked up, his eyes burning. You've taken everything from me. My past, my future, my very identity. And in doing so, we have given you the ultimate freedom, the voice countered. The freedom from illusion. The freedom to perceive reality not as it is presented, but as it fundamentally is. A subjective experience. Now, Michael, having reached this awareness, what will you choose to be? The screens around him began to change. No longer just data, they showed pathways, choices. Not physical doors, but conceptual ones. One path glowed red, labeled regression, return to manufactured reality. Another, a shimmering blue, stated integration, acceptance of the construct. A third, a vibrant chaotic green, pulsed with transcendence, forge new reality. He understood. This wasn't a choice about escaping the facility. This was a choice about escaping his mind, or rather choosing how his mind would exist within this inescapable truth. The no escape was absolute. He looked at the green option. Transcendence. Forge new reality. What did that even mean? To willingly embrace the artificiality, to become a co-creator of his own prison, or to somehow break free from the very concept of a prison. A new image appeared on the main screen, a live feed. It showed a vast, sprawling underground complex, far larger than he could have ever imagined. And in its deepest chambers, row upon row of identical circular rooms, each with a central console pulsing with light. And within some of those rooms, faint, shadowy figures, looking strikingly like him, staring at screens, grappling with their own final phases. He wasn't the only one. He was one of many. A single data point in a grand, terrifying experiment that spanned an entire hidden civilization. The facility wasn't just underground, it was underneath everything. The voice spoke again, quieter now, almost a suggestion. Your journey has yielded invaluable data, Michael. Your capacity to question, to seek truth, even when it shatters your world, is truly remarkable. But the ultimate test remains. What will you do with this truth? Michael closed his eyes, the weight of the universe pressing down on him. The flickering glitch he'd seen earlier, the rippling wall. It wasn't a malfunction. It was the veil thinning, the edges of his fabricated reality fraying. When he opened his eyes, a strange calm had settled over him. The fear was still there, a dull ache, but it was overshadowed by a profound, unsettling clarity. He looked at the choices: regression, integration, transcendence, all within the framework of their experiment. But what if there was a fourth choice? A choice they hadn't programmed? He walked slowly towards the central console, his reflection staring back at him from the polished surface. He reached out a trembling hand, not to select an option, but to touch the source of the voice, the heart of the machine that had orchestrated his entire existence. As his fingertips brushed the cool, smooth surface, the screens around him flared, then went dark. The ethereal hum of the facility seemed to deepen, to resonate within his very skull. He stood there, alone in the silence, the darkness pressing in. He was still in the facility, still trapped. But something had fundamentally shifted. The illusion was gone. The questions remained, but the answers, terrifying as they were, had been laid bare. The no escape from the underground research facility wasn't a physical barrier. It was a cognitive one, a prison of perception meticulously crafted, endlessly complex. And he, Michael Vance, the investigator, was now fully aware of the bars of his own mind. He was free from the lie, but irrevocably bound by the truth. The silence grew heavier, thicker, until it felt like a physical presence. He was no longer just a subject. He was a sentinel, standing guard over the chilling revelation, forever aware of the invisible architects of his reality. And in that profound, terrifying awareness, the true horror of the facility and the enduring nature of his no escape truly began to sink in. The experiment wasn't over. It had just begun, and he was its eternal, self-aware captive,